When you think of secret missions of the Second World War, you probably get an image of commandos making daring raids behind enemy lines to commit acts of sabotage, or maybe deep spies uncovering enemy plans. But one secret mission that is hardly remembered today perhaps outdid all the others in terms of its impact, not just on the Second World War, but on the war that followed. The small, super-secret Huff team, led by an obscure army scientist, literally rewrote the map of the world.
Accurate maps are important to the military for many reasons, and that was well understood by both sides during the Second World War. Simon Kettle writes on the website of global mapping company ESRI in 2016. The U.S. Office of the Chief of Engineers was deployed in World War II, and one of its commitments was to produce, with cooperation of the other Allied groups, through revisions and new position readings, battlefield situation maps such as the Normandy landings on 6 June 1944. Millions of maps were produced throughout the war. The Normandy invasion alone required 3,000 different maps, with a total of 70 million copies for keeping the military command fully aware of the operational situation on the ground, in the air, and at sea. However, as the Allies moved into France, mapping became much more difficult.
A geodetic reference point is a permanent, precisely surveyed location with known coordinates that is used as a reference point for making maps or other survey applications. They are the backbone of national and global reference systems. They're used for everything from placing roads and bridges to tracking tectonic movement. This is one from the U.S. Geodetic Survey, and despite the fact that it says on here that there's a $250 fine and or imprisonment for removing it, this one is actually perfectly legal. It was blown out as part of a highway project and sent to me by a viewer. But in 1944, geodetic reference points were a problem for the United States Army.
A website of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, explains that in geodesy and surveying, a control network, or simply control, is a set of reference points of known geospatial coordinates. In every country, thousands of such known geodetic points exist and are normally documented by the national mapping agencies. But Kettle continues. It quickly became apparent the lack of geodetic control the Allies held over Europe, probably through national jealousy as well as security purposes. Very little geodetic data was publicly available. The NGA continues. Early in the year 1944, it became evident to U.S. Army Office of the Chief Engineer that a significant deficiency existed in the holdings of geodetic horizontal and vertical control, as well as source materials required for military mapping operations. This deficit was specific to Europe, especially the Balkans. Much of Europe had no geodetic data publicly available, except that of first-order control, which was entirely too sparse to serve the needs of adequate, large-scale topographical mapping required in the European theater of operations. This produced various problems for the Allies, chief among them artillery. John Dill, military editor of Life magazine, wrote in 1958, "When the U.S. Army fought for months along the French-German border, 2/3 of its long-range artillery targets were so far over the horizon and behind the German lines that there was no way to observe where the shells were landing. The artillery commanders had to plot gun positions and the target on a map, compute the distance between the 2 points, and aim the guns at this range. If the maps had pinpoint accuracy, the shells should, in theory, hit the target. But many shells went astray simply because some of the Army's maps were not sufficiently accurate. Perfectly good maps showing U.S. gun positions in France, for example, did not jibe with maps showing enemy targets in Germany. The Army lacked the most vital information needed to correct the maps: geodetic control points in Germany, which could be matched up to the control points of the maps in France. The Germans had done the necessary surveying work, but the information was classified and was not on any of the maps that the U.S. Army could lay its hands on. In fact, the Germans had amassed a huge amount of mapping data. Susan Powell of the Earth Sciences and Map Library of the University of California at Berkeley wrote in a 2020 edition of the Journal of Map and Geography Libraries. In the years leading up to World War II and during the actual war years, the German military amassed an enormous collection of cartographic materials. It prolifically published map series, initially for military contingency mapping, but ultimately for use in planning and carrying out a war for territorial expansion and subjugation. What if the U.S. could get access to these maps? The idea had implications for the war in progress, but beyond as well. Dill writes, the Army sent out a call for geodesists. Floyd Huff was born in Greene County, New York in 1898, the youngest of 5 children. He graduated with a degree in civil engineering in 1919 and began work with the federal government, first doing mapping in the U.S. West and then in Washington, D.C. He later worked on the massive Colorado River Aqueduct, which takes water from the Colorado River to Southern California, a project which the American Society of Civil Engineers has listed as one of the 7 modern civil engineering wonders. When the Army made its call in 1944, Dill explains, Huff had served as a U.S. government and oil company geodesist for 20 years. Huff understood the assignment, writing at the time, the war in Europe offered a unique opportunity to exploit known targets, and thus to procure from enemy sources captured material of this type, both for immediate use of artillery units and for preparation of operational maps. The NGA writes, in September 1944, Huff, chief of the geodetic branch of the Military Intelligence Division of the Office of the Chief Engineer, was directed to organize the team and to proceed without delay to the European theater of operations. Dale writes that Huff organized a small group of experts, scrounged up some vehicles, and went up to the front. Powell writes, Huff was appointed a U.S. Army major and was the leader of HOUGHTEAM, a special unit of the Military Intelligence Division, Office of the Chief of Engineers. This secret U.S. Army military intelligence unit operated in the European theater of operations from October of 1944 to September of 1945. The NGA writes, the Huff team operated freely throughout the European theater of operation and had no table of operations and equipment, nor was it attached to any Army group. Huff team arrived in Paris, October 23, 1944. NGA writes, an office was quickly established in that city and research work started among the various local libraries. Portions of the team operated on the battlefront in such locations as Germany and France, with arrival time on the day that it was being cleared of enemy troops. At various times during this period, other portions of the team were sent for geodetic and map research to such places in the ETO as Lyon, Marseille, Rome, Pisa, Florence, Foggia, Naples, Lisbon, and Brussels. Kettle explains that the team spent time in Paris as well as on the front, typically arriving on the day it was cleared of enemy personnel. Science journalist Greg Miller wrote in a 2017 edition of Smithsonian Magazine, along with 1,800 pounds of cameras and other equipment for creating microfilm records, Huff team also carried 11,000 index cards detailing the holdings of the Army Map Service, as well as numerous target lists of technical universities, government institutions, libraries, and other places likely to have the materials that they had been sent to capture. The list also named German scientists who seemed likely to cooperate and some who were not to be trusted. The effort started producing results almost immediately. The first major city in Germany captured by the Americans was Aachen. The Battle of Aachen, fought between September 12th and October 21st, 1944, had been hard fought. While most of the civilian population had been evacuated, the fighting had destroyed much of the city, including the Technical University. But, Miller writes, though it had been nearly wrecked by American bombs, thousands of books remained. But what caught Huff's attention were the bundles of folders stacked outside. It appears as if the Germans had left a number of files all roped up, ready to load onto trucks when they made a hasty exit. Huff wrote, the abandoned documents included tables of exceptionally precise survey data covering German territory that the Allies had yet to reach. Just what Huff was looking for. His team quickly microfilmed the material and sent it to the front, where Allied artillery units could immediately use it to improve their targeting. Huff told the Associated Press in 1956, we got the material through interrogation and captured personnel and through our own searching. Among the members of the team were men who, Miller wrote, had been through the secret military intelligence training center at Camp Ritchie, Maryland. Among these Ritchie boys, as they were known, were European immigrants who had fled to the United States to escape Nazi persecution. At Camp Ritchie, they received training in interrogation and other psychological operations. Their job was to question European civilians about the movement of enemy troops, translate captured documents, and interrogate prisoners of war. For the refugees among them, it was a chance to leverage their language skills and cultural familiarity to defeat the enemy that had uprooted their lives. Dill writes that following the U.S. infantry into city after city, the Huff team swooped down on German universities and institutes, scooped up all the maps and geodetic information in sight, converted them quickly to the U.S. military map system, and handed their findings to the artillerymen. The gunner's aim improved immediately. There was much to find. Kettle explains by the spring of 1945 the unit was in Germany and working with the 3rd and 7th Armies, providing materials to survey and artillerymen, greatly assisting in battle performance. During this time, the team captured vital geodetic material from the occupation of Baden-Baden, Württemberg, and Bavaria. Huff said some of it was buried in the ground. Some of it was behind walls that were blackened over with lampblack to disguise the wall breaks. We found one important batch stacked atop some human bones in the catacombs beneath an old monastery. the remains of monks who had died hundreds of years ago. The Associated Press reported Huff and David Mills, a map service associate on the intelligence team, told of finding a terrific mass of data hidden beneath a pile of rotten potatoes in a basement in southern Bavaria. But the team's largest success came in the spring of 1945. Dale writes, Huff was still on the lookout for captured German data when he performed a map miracle that some of his fellow scientists later acclaimed as the greatest coup in the history of geodesy. Dale explains, scouting around Germany in cloak and dagger fashion, Huff heard about a huge cache of military maps and geodetic data captured from the Russians. The Germans had brought them back from the USSR and then hidden them away. The NGA writes the collection was being stored someplace in Germany. However, the captured German soldiers were not talking. By chance, a conversation was overheard inside a hospital that was treating wounded German soldiers. In this conversation, one of the Huff team members learned about a cache of data and materials in the remote village of Zalfeld, Germany. Dill writes his men had to search the German village before they found the prize, and no wonder. The Germans had hidden it in an old warehouse in a back alley. It was, Dill writes, a bit musty and smelly, but still useful. In fact, Kettle writes, the cache, found in a remote warehouse on the outskirts of Zalfeld, turned out to include the entire geodetic archives of the German army. Miller writes, Huff, Mills, and 5 enlisted men arrived on April 17th, 4 days after the U.S. 87th Infantry Division had captured the town. The 87th had kept on rolling to the east without pausing to set up a military government. There was barely time to take stock of everything. Huff and his men spent the night in the warehouse to safeguard their discovery. The immediate concern was roaming bands of Soviet and Polish refugees, recently liberated from nearby forced labor camps and now taking revenge by looting homes and buildings and setting fires. Huff estimated there were 4,000 of them, and many of them were drunk. Some of them were armed. If they got to the warehouse, Huff and his men would be poorly equipped to defend it. And worse, Kettle notes, in true World War II stories of adventure, the discovery of these documents didn't finish the story. Instead, noting the location of Zalfeld and the time of the discovery, little time was left for grabbing the materials. Dill explains, while the Americans had captured Zalfeld, the village was scheduled to be turned over to the Russians as part of their zone of occupation. The NGA writes, fearing the worst, Huff wrote an expeditious letter to the Chief of Staff of the 8th Corps, stating that in the city of Zalfeld, military personnel is entirely inadequate to cope with the situation, which may arrive at any time. Dale writes, Huff hurriedly borrowed trucks from a U.S. artillery unit, and the last of them, loaded with data, was just clearing out one side of the village, rushing for the U.S. zone, when the Russians moved in with their tanks on the other side. Miller writes that by May 8th, the day that Germany officially surrendered, they had shipped 35 2.5-ton capacity truckloads of maps, data, and instruments, 75 miles south to Bamberg, a town safely within the American occupation zone. Miller notes the team also captured 7 giant contraptions called stereoplanographs, cutting-edge technology used to create topographic maps from aerial photos. Bristling with knobs and adjustable arms, each machine was big enough to fill a room and required 2 people to operate. A complex interior system of lenses and filters combined images from overlapping aerial photos to make high-precision measurements of elevation differences between hills and valleys and other features of the terrain. The models captured in Zalfeld were made by Zeiss, the renowned German optics firm. Huff estimated their combined value at $500,000, nearly $7 million today. But there was still one more coup to come. The NGA explains that in addition to acquiring mapping and geodetic materials, the Huff team captured internal mapping agency chiefs who were instrumental in helping the U.S. discover hidden caches. But their most important target, Gerlach Hemmerich, the German Army's chief of war mapping and surveying, was missing. The NGA explains that Huff tracked down the general's home address, which had been taken over as a U.S. Army headquarters. Upon arrival, he questioned the female cook and noted that she spoke in pure German, usually only used by highly educated Germans, and after intense questioning, he determined that the cook was indeed Frau Hemmerich, wife of the general. She said the general had just started a new job, stoking furnaces for the Americans. By the time the team disbanded in late September of 1945, they had, the NGA writes, shipped 202 boxes of geodetic data on 900,000 stations in Europe to the Army Map Service, giving nearly complete coverage of 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th control in all German and Allied operational World War II areas of the continent. 627 boxes of captured maps, covering approximately the same areas noted above. large quantities of photographic prints and dispositives for portions of the above areas, 371 boxes of various surveying and photogrammetric instruments, including 7 Zeiss stereoplanographs, geodetic and cartographic library reference books on all countries in Europe, as well as acquiring a nucleus of German geodesists and mathematicians, and their removal to the United States area of occupation for use on scientific projects by U.S. forces. But the usefulness went beyond the war. Dill explains, all these bits of knowledge were later pieced together with maps and other geodetic data that Huff's team had picked up in other parts of Europe, from Spain to Sweden, creating a single European map system. That system, European Datum 1950 or ED50, would lead to the development, the NGA writes, of the Universal Transverse Mercator Grid, UTM, a worldwide plane coordinate system developed in the 1940s by the U.S. Army's Corps of Engineers. This coordinate system is the father of the current reference system currently in use by the U.S. Armed Forces and NATO, the Military Grid Reference System, or MGRS. This was crucial during the Cold War. Gary Weir, historian for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, explains, the ability to target Red Square with an intercontinental ballistic missile launched from a silo in Montana requires a level of precision that can only come from geodesy. And the work didn't go unnoticed. Dill notes that when Huff met some Russian geodesists at a conference in 1957, one Russian delegate eyed the American with cold politeness. "We have heard a lot about you, Mr. Huff," he said. But Miller writes it soon proved equally useful for civilian operations and was adapted for applications as varied as economic development projects, ecological research, and oil prospecting. UTM literally made the map of the world that we use today. Yale University historian William Rankin explained in 2016. UTM showed how to think differently about space and location using mathematics. Rankin says, it was like GPS before GPS. And the maps, distributed throughout university libraries and largely overlooked, now provide a vital historical reference. Powell explains World War II was a watershed event that generated tremendous social, cultural, and political change around the globe. In many ways, the war unmade an older world that was fundamentally transformed, swept away by upheaval and violence. These maps document what once existed, towns and villages that have been eradicated, place names that have been changed, political boundaries that have been redrawn. Also, due to the widespread destruction in Europe during World War II and the torching of many cultural institutions, some of these maps are unique, the only surviving example of a small print run of a few hundred sheets. The captured map collections contain information that cannot be found elsewhere, but that is key to the work of historians, genealogists, and many other researchers.
Huff and his team literally rewrote the map of the world, but Miller notes that despite their accomplishments, the exploits of Huff and his team have only been mentioned in passing by a handful of historians and are little known even among the military geospatial community. He writes that little is publicly known about the true scope of the information that they captured, or the ingenuity they used to secure it, because their work was done in secret and the technical data was only shared with military intelligence experts and academics. But, he says, it was a vast scientific treasure. Members of the team received promotions and various awards. Huff himself was awarded the Legion of Merit, went back to his position as head of the geodetic branch of the Army Mapping Service. He retired at the rank of colonel. He passed away on January 6, 1976, at the age of 77. In 2018, he was inducted into the National Geospatial Intelligence Hall of Fame. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.